Okay, why don't we start off with introductions? I think you may know many of the folks on your negotiations team, but just in case you don't, this will help orient you. Do you want to start us off, George?
Sure.
Or Georgia, you can start.
No, actually, George should go. You're the president,
What is my official title?
board president.
Board president? Well, okay,
Chapter chair.
chapter
Chapter
chair,
chair.
thank you. I'm George McElroy. I am the chapter chair for SEMA for the Superior Court.
I am Georgia Koo. I work in court facilities.
I'm Vanessa Wiggins. I'm supervising probate investigator.
Zeb Feldman, staff assigned to the court unit.
Lauren Sue, also staff, one of the CMOE3 business agents.
And I'm Joanne Yee, one of the senior mediators.
And we're also joined online by other negotiators who are either traveling or were unable to attend today. Laura, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, hello. I'm traveling, but I want to be here. I'm Laura Romero. I'm a staff attorney at the South Help Center and member of Court Advisory Council.
Wonderful. And Steve?
Hi, I'm Steve Gall. I'm the IT infrastructure manager for the court.
And Brandon? If Brandon's on, Brandon is on. There we go.
Hi, Brandon Kunimura. I'm on the SEMA team. Yeah, I'm in classes right now.
Thank you. Wonderful. And I appreciate everyone being able to make it here today. So, we're allowed to have, just to give you some background, we're allowed to have 5 individuals from your unit, from the Santa Clara court unit at the table. But you notice there were more than 7 people that introduced themselves. That's because we had some alternates. So, for example, Vanessa was able to join us and sit in on a day that Steve was traveling. And other people have been able to pinch hit when other folks have been able to go attend.
Is Sabrina on?
Oh, I didn't see Sabrina. Sabrina, are you there?
Yeah.
Could you introduce yourself?
Sabrina Sue, application supervisor at the court.
Thank you. Also, another alternate that was able to help us out during the negotiations. So a little bit, you can see here, and I'll share online. I'm holding up right now a document that's been passed out in person. I'll share online where you can find this. If you go to the SEMA website, this is one of the featured items there. So let me share my screen. Refresh the page. And so you can see this. You don't even need to log in. And you should be able to see, number one, you can meet your bargaining team, but also here's the summary of changes and the tentative agreement. So you can just go in here and actually follow along. This is the document that we're going to be looking at right now. In fact, could I ask someone to post it in chat? And then also here's the MOA. This is the memorandum of agreement. You might hear us call it the contract. This is what you're going to be voting on. And it covers all of the changes that have occurred. You'll see anywhere that this is the nomenclature we use. When a 40 is struck through, that means that it's language that's deleted. And where it's underlined, that means that it's language that's added, just so that everybody can see. And that's also a document that we will be referring to. So before we actually get into the summary of changes that we want to share with you, I think a lot of us want to offer a little bit of a narrative about where we are in this cycle and how we arrived at the contract that we're presenting to you today. And then, of course, we'll go through this and we'll get into the very particulars and how it affects you and impacts your pocketbook. So first off, going into negotiations, we were, I would say, aggressive with our economic asks and proposals. I think what you'll see here is, frankly, a very modest contract in terms of economics. As you may know, this is a budgetary cut year for the court. So the court lost about $4.4 million in funding this year as a result of the negative adjustments from the state. So although we were able to secure some economic benefit for you all, it's certainly not as rich as the 33333 that we're coming off from. Plus, if you recollect, with our inflationary language, you received I'll characterize it as an unexpected additional raise of 3% 2 years ago and 1% this last year. So you're coming off of 6% 2 years ago, 4% this past year. And then now we're really looking at a pretty modest 2% and 1%. So I don't want anyone to think that this is something that the negotiation team is trying to cloak or hide from you. It is a modest economic package. It's something where we were able to achieve some of the benefits that you all pointed out that you really wanted to see in your survey, which we'll get to, like preserving your current healthcare benefits with no increases, your current pension plan with no increases, and then we were able to secure some additional time off, which we'll get to, and some cash out options and so on. Beyond that, I'd love to hear from the negotiation team and also you, Lawrence, if there's additional kind of like background you wanted to share with the unit about how we got to this agreement.
I can chime in, Zeb. Essentially, to try to paint the picture from a very high level, the state of California released its May revised budget for fiscal year 24-25, and also they're doing adjustments for fiscal year 25-26 as well. And unfortunately, our negotiations correlated with the state, being in a $27.6 billion deficit for 24-25, and then a projected $28.4 billion deficit in 25-26. So, the governor's office and the state legislature, had to agree to a tremendous amount of cuts that pretty much touch every department under the state of California umbrella. One of which was fairly significant, was an 8% cut to all state operations across the board. The elimination of 10,000 unfilled state positions. How it trickled down to the court is really, I would categorize it as a double whammy. First of all, the Judicial Council sent requests on an annual basis to the Department of Finance, requesting increases due to inflation to cover inflationary pressure. Well, for fiscal year 24-25, the Department of Finance rejected any additional funds for inflation. So, that actually has an adverse effect on the Judicial Council and subsequently our court. Secondly, the Judicial Council was mandated to take a $97 million cut. And it's not just for fiscal year 24-25. The terms of the cut is ongoing. So that essentially means that the $97 million annual cut to the Judicial Council is ongoing until notified otherwise. That portion of the cut for our court for fiscal year 24-25 is $4.4 million. So again, not only did we not see any inflationary money, but our court is going to take a $4.4 million hit. And again, it's not just for next year, it is ongoing. So those were significant headwinds for which we entered into negotiations, which really made obtaining any significant financial benefit. It just made that conversation practically, I'm not going to say impossible, but very, very challenging.
It was an uphill battle.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Does anyone else have anything they'd like to add?
Steve, if you're in a position to share, because you're the, when I say most senior, the person who's been through the most negotiations on the negotiation team, even more so than me, did you want to share how this cycle might have contrasted with other cycles you've been in?
Sure. And first of all, I apologize. I'm kind of in a loud setting, but I'll try to get as far away from this as possible here. Yeah, like George and Georgia said, it was a tough year. And it's really unfortunate to go into bargaining just as we're getting our budget cut. Yes, there's been some tough cycles before. There's been cycles where we've got zero raise. A couple of those actually that I can remember. Where we've done some other creative stuff to get, other kind of non-economic or quasi-economic benefits added in to make it, tenable for the membership. But but I will say that the court came in originally at just one-time money, and so they weren't even looking to give us a percentage to build our base. So, like Georgia said, uphill battle. But this is definitely not the cycle where we were going to get 3, 4, 5%. That became pretty clear, and so we did the best that we think we could in a 3% increase over essentially a year and a half into the second year, but front loading at 2%, right now, and then having that 1% kick in 6 months early. So we tried to make, even though we're coming in at 3% total, really trying to maximize that and front load as much as possible, and also just communicating that it is just a 2-year contract, and this is one of the shortest contracts we've ever bargained. And, we're not locked in at 1% for 5 years or something like that. So we're taking a little bit of a downturn this time, but, in a couple of years, less than a couple of years, we'll be back at the table, and then hopefully we can make it up.
Great, thanks, Steve. Anything else folks wanted to offer, or should we get right into it?
Can I
Go
just
ahead,
jump
George.
in one last thing? And I'm going to mirror something that Steve has said, to us when we were in caucus, which I believe I do concur with this 110%. I mean, the contract that we have, if you look back, at all the historical work that has been done in negotiations by people that are still here and that are not here, the base contract that we have is very, very good. One thing that stands out, at least for me, is that we have a lot of time off.
Mhm.
And that is not just for people that have been with the court a long period of time. That also translates to those that have just recently joined the court. We have a lot of time off. And again, we have, in my humble opinion, we have phenomenal health benefits. I have a son that's extremely disabled, and there's a lot of challenges for him from a medical perspective, and I just have not had any issues with benefits that are provided by the court. Another thing that we have is retiree medical. Now, granted, I know that retiree medical is sort of parsed. Those of us that have been with the court a while have a plan that's different from others that have recently joined the court. But pretty much essentially other employers do not offer retiree medical at all anymore. So again, when you look at the base of what we were given as a result of the effort of a bunch of other people, cumulatively over time, we were starting from a very favorable perspective in regards to the whole bucket of benefits that are provided by the court. So I just wanted to kind of give my thought in that regards.
Thank you, George. So also I want people, especially in the room, but also online, to feel free to just throw your hand up, interrupt us at any time. The purpose of today's meeting is to give you the information and answer your questions. There will be a dedicated Q&A section at the end, but oftentimes if you have a question about something, other people are going to have a question about it. So as we get into the language itself, please don't be shy about offering that. For people that are online, we do have a dues paying member list here. So we're just going to be auditing to make sure that dues paying members are the ones that we're interacting with. If you wish to sign up, we'll post that in chat. We have invited dues and non-dues paying members here today to look at the list. Of course, only dues paying members will be able to. So we're going to get into it right now. This is the summary of changes document that we're going to be getting into. People online can follow along. If you're here in the room as well, and you can follow through with the actual printed contract, which is this larger document here. So as George pointed out, it's a 2-year term. So that's the term of the contract. It's a relatively brief contract. We know that this year is a I'll call it a takeaway year, a year where the court's funding is being reduced. While we can't fully see the future, the current predictions, from the state are that it will be flat funded, meaning the court will be flat funded next year. So the current projection is not that there will be additional takeaways next year or funding cuts, but again, it will be stable. Stable obviously is not what we want. We want to see increases, but that's the prediction at this moment of where we'll see the court budget next year. Term of contract, hopefully there are no questions, pretty straightforward, August 1, 2024 through July 31, 2026. General wage increases, this is Article 2, Section 2.2, also hopefully relatively easy to understand. The first full pay period following ratification, you'll see a 2% increase that will be reflected right away in your pay stubs. And then effective the first full pay period in February 2025. So just about 6 months afterwards, as was pointed out, we pulled that additional 1% forward so that you would get that rather than in one full year, as has been our traditional practice with the court. You get it a little bit earlier. So you get that 1%. It's a little more money in your pocket a little bit earlier. Still not quite where we wanted to be economically, but at least you get that money a little bit sooner. And of course, there's the compounding effect. I think we all recognize that having a 2% and then a 1% is better than having a 3%. You're missing out on 6 months, so it takes a long time to make that money up if you ever do in the career of your contract here, but always compounding is better. And Laura, I understand you wanted to share with us the third item there, the inflation protection abeyance. Is that correct? Oh, you
I'm
might.
not able to see the.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Laura.
Not able to see the document in front of us. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Well,
You know,
it's
I'm not able to really share right now. We have a
Okay,
bad connection.
George will be able to share that for you. Go ahead. George.
So essentially, in this contract, we agreed to essentially suspend the COLA language for the term of the contract. Why I do not believe that's a material give back is because, in my humble opinion, I don't believe the Department of Finance is going to approve any request for inflationary money by the Judicial Council for the next 2 years. However, we did, the court had proposed to significantly modify the language in such a fashion that, in my humble opinion, I don't believe the language would ever trigger, had we concurred to the changes. However, we did reach agreement to the court to actually leave the language as is, which did result in a 4% raise for all members during the last 5-year term. So again, it's unchanged, but just to be clear, it's suspended for the next 2 years.
And also, a question. Yes, sir. No, I mean, you can go ahead and ask now, and then if we find that we're really running into a time crunch, then I might be like, okay, hold it up. Sure.
Effectively, how many times has this union gone year to year based on, I think it's the end of the terms of the agreement, very Article 22 says, if, we don't reach an agreement, it continues year to year unless, someone puts in a request, 60 days, etc. So basically, my understanding, let me rephrase it. Yep. My understanding is every period, we renegotiate a new contract. Is that correct?
Correct.
So effectively, we've removed this from the contract. It's still there, but when we come back 2 years later, we're going to have to advocate for putting it back in.
No, you're talking about the COLA language?
Well, yeah, but let him finish the question.
Okay. Because, unless this is a contract, I can't find a term that says that all these terms necessarily survive when we go to renegotiate, unless we just do the year-to-year kind of continuing of this contract, right?
Yep.
An extension of this contract. I see and I understand that the general policy is to kind of take these terms and tweak this and tweak that, but effectively everything's on the table when you go to the table 2 years from now. Is that correct?
So yes and no. So the reason, and I realize that's a confusing answer. So what you're referring to is that if neither party wishes to reopen the contract, then the current terms and conditions roll over for 1 year. So let's just pretend that happened at the end of this contract. Our CPI protection language would be back into the contract. The reason being is that this, if you look at the larger page, right, you'd have to look now in the contract, not in the summary, is that it says for the period of August 1, 2024 through July 31, 2026, the paragraph below does not apply. So that sunset language is removed and this durable language is reinserted into the.
But there is absolutely no way anyone would ever want this contract to continue because it doesn't include any wage increases beyond 2025.
Correct.
So we're definitely going to go for a new contract in 2026.
That's correct.
And at that point, we have this language that's vestigial essentially. At that point, we can ask for it to be put back in, but isn't the court going to come back to us and say, well, you gave it up. Now you got, I mean, I see you shaking your head. I know who you're negotiating against. She happens to be my boss and I know how she thinks. So I'm just saying, like,
Yeah.
you know, I worry, what did we get in exchange for giving that up in the future?
Sure. So several things. Really to George's point, and maybe George wants to respond to this, we knew that in the next, or we can confidently predict, we don't know. We can confidently predict that the CPI language will not be relevant for the 2 years because of the budgetary woes of the state, right? So we're not going to see extra money fall into the court's lap and then we say, hey, we'd like a share. So the court wanted to remove this language entirely, right? Because it cost them 4%, right? In the last 5-year contract, an additional 4% is really what it was. And so they came in saying, we want to get rid of this language and we said, no, we'd like to preserve the language. And they wanted to narrow the definition of it. We said, well, let's take a look at that. We couldn't come to agreement. So we said, okay, let's kick the can, if you will, on this language discussion down the road. I'll be frank with you all, and I think I'm representing what the negotiations team said, and they can yell at me if I'm not. We said, we'd love for the court, we want to keep this language because it's valuable to us. But if the court is interested in buying it from us, have at it, make us an offer. And the court said, we're broke, we can't afford to buy it. She said, okay, let's kick the conversation down the road then 2 years when maybe the court is in a position to buy this language. It's language that we got negotiated in for the first time 5 years ago, right? Because we're just coming off of a 5-year contract. We didn't have this language before. We got this language negotiated in, and it turned out to be very economically valuable. So that's kind of the state.
I guess my last follow-up, I guess to what extent does it matter to you as a contract negotiator that you're going to be kind of, do you feel like you can walk in 2 years from now with a presumption that that's coming back in without any consideration going on?
100%.
Yep.
So you always negotiate from what's called CCL, current contract language. And what will happen when we come back to the table in, let's say, 1.5 years, approximately, because it's a 2-year deal, right? What would happen is the as written language with the what I'm calling COLA language, CPI language, comes back in, and now the court has to present a proposal saying get rid of it.
So let me kind of put it in other words, and maybe layman's term, is that it's almost like we're setting aside. So we're not taking this out. We're just saying this still applies, but for this contract year, we're not going to invoke it. It's not going to be able to be
Right.
invoked, right? But it's still there. That language is still there. We're just not going to vote. We agree not to invoke it this year. But when this ends, it's still there. So it's not that we took it out.
No, we're
But I agree
We're on
with
it.
you. If we actually
Okay.
took that
Yeah.
language out, then we would, be in trouble. But
Right.
we're not taking the language out. We're just saying the language is still there, but for the purpose of this contract, we're not gonna
Yeah.
apply it during this contract year, but it's still there. Does that make
So-
sense?
Yeah, to add to everybody's comment, well, if we taken it out, it wouldn't be written in here. It would not be part of that. The sunset language, or not sunset, but the deferral, the bans language wouldn't even be in there. That language would have completely been gone. That whole section would have been removed. I
I
understand.
will defer to the contract negotiation team, but when I negotiate contracts, either a term is in and it's effective, or under contract law, you can't really have a term in a contract that's not effective and say, well, it's still there. I understand, but it's there to basically be a discussion point for the future, is what I'm hearing.
Yep.
I don't want to take up too much
Mhm,
time on this point. I've got other, probably more salient, but I
Okay.
appreciate it.
Other questions about that abeyance? I see none online. We're now, it looks like we're up to 59 online now. Okay, furloughs, Steve, I understand you wanted to speak on this one, item 4? Perhaps not. Do you want to talk to this one, Lawrence?
Or you want to present?
So furloughs and layoff protection. So this appears in Article 14. Some of you may recollect a few years ago, we entered into negotiations with the court and they were interested in securing furlough language. We led a coalition that originally included Skippy, SEIU, and the translators and court reporters. Although they negotiate in a different way. They're at a state and region level, but they were still joining our coalition nonetheless. A couple meetings in, Skippy withdrew from the coalition and said, hey, we don't believe that there's a budget problem here. We're not engaging in any kind of discussions. We agreed that we would take furloughs and people would be able to select voluntary reduced work hours as long as we hit a certain target, then we'd achieve layoff protection, which we did. In fact, one of your bargaining team members took a full year on break, even. Others took reduced work hours voluntarily, and we met our target and achieved layoff protection, as did our brothers and sisters in SEIU. In Skippy, as I think most of you know, they said we're not willing to continue this conversation, and they experienced, was it 56?
52.
52, thank you, 52 layoffs from their unit. Which is very painful for their unit and something that they were just unwilling to come to the table on. The court wanted to have this language. I'm guessing, and we said nakedly at the table, this language really isn't for us. It's language that you need in case to not only get into other contracts, but in case you're unable to come to an agreement with us in the 45 days. We've already expressed a willingness to look at furloughs in a way that you all give us direction on. When we did a survey last time, the membership overwhelmingly, I think it was more than 80%, said, do you want layoffs or do you want to look at reduction in hours in exchange for more time off? And you all said reduction in hours. We don't want to look at layoffs. So this is I'll call it a feature of the contract. What the contract does is it mandates the court to talk to us for 45 days. If it's unable and we're unable to reach an agreement with the court concerning furloughs, they have access to this language where they could implement up to a 15% cut in exchange for up to 15% time off of work. And if they were to do that, they are unable to lay people off. Similarly, should the court, let's say, not engage in this and choose to lay people off, then they are unable to furlough people. So it's you pick one or the other. Steve, I don't know if you're in a place where you can talk. If you are, I know you had a couple comments you wanted to give on this. Otherwise, I'd open it up to other bargaining team members. Oh, go ahead.
No, I apologize. I got into a weird meeting mode there. What I want to say on this is it's not my favorite thing to see furlough language or layoff language in the contract. But what I will say is we don't have any language preventing it, right, in our last contract or any contract leading up to this one. So, the court is always able, it's one of the tools of their organization. They're the employer. They can set the rules of workforce and workforce reductions if necessary. So the court has every right to institute a furlough tomorrow, even without this language, and they could start laying people off tomorrow. They could just say, hey, bad budget year, and here's how we're gonna balance the books. So that capability has always been there. What this language does is it gives us a little bit of protection in case either they want to do furloughs or they want to do layoffs, right? So at least we have some protection in the case of the court wanting to move forward with these, and we really didn't have any protection before officially. Now, the court, when, they talked about furloughs before and reduction in budget, a couple cycles ago, they came to us. They didn't have to, they weren't obligated to, but they came to SEMA, they came to Skippy and said, hey, let's talk about this. And SEMA came up with, 2 or 3 different, reduce work hours and take a year off and take golden handshake kind of thing, early retirement or current retirement. And so we worked with the court in good faith, but there was no obligation for the court to come to us. There was no obligation for them to negotiate with us on that behalf. So again, this just gives us some semblance of protection in the case of the court wanting to do either of these things.
And can I just jump in for 1 second? I wasn't part of the negotiation team until, fairly recently. So, what Steve is making reference to in 2020, I was no part of from a SEMA perspective, but my understanding of what transpired is that, the court came to SEMA and we agreed to, or SEMA agreed to a 10% furlough, but that wasn't sufficient for the court. The court had a number in mind of which savings they wanted to derive. So after, SEMA agreed to a 10% furlough, the court was still not guaranteeing that they would not do layoffs unless, there were some very generous people in SEMA that stepped up and said, well, I'll take a 20% furlough. I will take the year off, et cetera, so forth. And it was those generous individuals that stepped up to the plate that enabled the court to reach the number of salary savings that they were looking for SEMA to prevent layoffs from occurring in SEMA. This language, on the other hand, essentially says, in the event that we agree to a furlough, there will be no layoffs. So that will not, what happened in 2020, where members, had to step up to the plate and say, I'll take additional furlough, I'll take a year off without pay. That cannot happen now. If we agree to a furlough, there will be no layoffs. So I think that's, very important just for you all to note. And again, some of you may not have been around 4 years ago and were not aware that in that case, furloughs, 10% furlough was not sufficient to protect us from layoffs.
That's correct. And one thing that I want to just offer about what Steve said, the employer, and this is established by labor law, always has access to layoffs. They cannot impose a furlough unless they have met with us. And if we didn't agree to one, they couldn't just make one up. Then they have to go back to the layoffs, which is something that this unit, at least historically, has stated it doesn't want. So that's why it's not why this language came about. The court was interested in this language, and it's one that we got some protection in exchange for. Are there any oh, yes, ma'am. That's correct. So what this language does, and I'm glad you asked that question because we didn't spend any time on it. In section 14.
Just for the folks online, if you could just repeat the question again.
Oh, yeah, sorry, maybe people didn't hear that. The question was, as in 2021, right? In 2021, when we had the furlough, does this mean that you get time off in exchange for the reduction of pay? And the answer to that is yes. So, and it's percent for percent. So if you take, let's say the furlough is 5%, then you get a 5% reduction in pay and you come to work 5% less. Furloughs can be defined in many different ways. That can be advantageous to the union or advantageous to the employer. In this case, it's proportional, right? It's defined. So you could theoretically have like the employer say, I'm going to reduce your pay by 10%, but I'm only going to reduce the amount of time that you work by 5%. That's obviously bad for us, right? We don't want that. Something too that we wanted, there's a question online I'll get to in a moment. There's something also that we wanted to take a look at local employers. County of Santa Clara did furlough very similarly to how we did it here at the court. Something that we absolutely did not want to see is if you have friends or family that work at the city of San Jose, what the city of San Jose did is they waited for the contracts to lapse and then just imposed a 10% reduction to pay. So there was no, like, it's not that you get 10% less time. There's like, yeah, you all take a 10% haircut. And then now those unions are getting back to where they were, 5 years ago, which is a tough, we don't absolutely don't want that. At least with the furlough, you come to work less and the employer has a vested interest in getting you back to work.
And just one thing I wanted to add, it's up to 1.5 days. If the court came and
Up to
said
15.
we wanted to do 1 day every 10 days, this language would still apply. And, the court really, they don't just furlough loosely. Anytime there's a furlough, it's going to have a direct effect on the court's ability to render services to the public. If we're here 10% less of the time, well, that will definitely translate to a loss of services that will be provided to the public. So, the court, is very, they will only trigger furloughs when it's absolutely necessary.
Okay, thank you. There's a question online about this, and the answer is furlough. Let me read the question for the people in the room. Did the court give any indication as to having to implement furloughs or layoffs? So the court did not say that they were planning on doing this, like, let's say in 6 months or 1.5 years, but the court did say that if it needed to, its preference would always be furloughs. So that's something that the court let slip is not the right word, because they were very open about it, but they were just open that they vastly prefer furloughs. While it's not a feature of the summary of changes, because it's not something we changed, you have very strong layoff language that makes it very unpleasant for the employer. And if people want to stick around afterwards, we can talk about that. Lawrence, I think you wanted to take the next one for a scheduled time off.
Yes, absolutely. Something when we get into court negotiations, we really absolutely want to look at the survey results. So remember the surveys that you completed, and I want to say when it closed in February of earlier this year. Some of those results have also shown us what were your economic priorities for both new and existing language. And so for the next 2 items, this is very responsive to exactly those. You'll see under here for scheduled time off, cash out increase. Previously, you could only cash out 40 hours. You are now able to cash out 60 hours. And I want to note that in every single summary of changes, there's a citation next to each item. So you can absolutely refer it to the tentative agreement or the new MOA to look at more expansive language to kind of see more of the intricacies and details. But a very high level overview of it, simply put, employees can now cash up to 60 hours of STO. And we do have a good number of members who have a pretty big STO bank and aren't able to really draw down onto those hours. So being able to cash out even more is more of an economic benefit for our members in the shorter term when they're able to have those hours be able to be cashed out. In our next item of management leave increase, this was yet another priority too as well. Although not necessary for the entire membership, for folks who have at least 15 years of service, and surprisingly, that is actually almost half of the entire membership at the court. We have a pretty good longevity amongst court membership. Folks who have at least 15 years of service, you can now take an additional 8 hours of management leave. So for folks who currently have management leave, you can take up to 40 hours, but now for those individuals who have 15 years or more, you can take 48 hours. This is one of the ways that the court has recognized some amount of longevity as a benefit for those individuals who serve at the court for 15 years or more, being able to take an additional 8 hours of management leave. And the survey results have actually shown a lot of members do use up quite a significant amount of the management leave, if not almost the entire bank of it. All right, I'll turn it back to you, Zeb, for service recognition award.
Great, thank you. Also something I just want to point out is, I haven't said it yet in this negotiation cycle, but if you've listened to me in prior ones when I've been presenting, I say we always are negotiating for 3 groups of people: current employees, future employees, and retired employees and members. And so something that I want to point out, a couple of the features that Lawrence just mentioned and what we're about to talk to, the management leave increase of 8 hours, that affects people that are 15 years here in the court, 15 years or longer. That's our longer term members. The service recognition award that Joanne and Vanessa are going to speak to in a moment covers mid to long range because it starts firing at 5 years, right? And then also for more junior employees is the parental leave, which we'll cover in item 13. So I just want to make that clear that we're really trying to have a balanced approach, that we're not trying to say, hey, look, we're really looking for just younger, more junior people that are joining the union, or hey, we're only looking at the longer term people. We always try to take a balanced approach. But Joanne, I think you want to talk about the service recognition.
In the past, if you've been here long enough to recognize your years of service, you might have gotten coasters. Or, paperweights or, clock. So it was a pleasant surprise to me, about a year ago, they gave you cash money. And that was good, right? But the thing with any of those awards, it's at management's discretion to even give you anything, right? They're not obligated. We actually got them to agree to actually put it in the contract. So they are now obligated to do a service award, award, and it is that cash office that they started a year ago. Okay, so they can't take away, they're not gonna go back to giving you coasters for working here for 5 years. So I thought that was great. And so it's the same thing. For every year that you are here, you get $100 in a sense. So at 5 years, it's, $500 and so on and so forth. So I'm glad that the court was able to agree with us to actually put it in language. So it's not gonna be taken away from us.
And did you want to add anything more to that, Vanessa?
Well, I do. And I love that it's memorialized, and I do appreciate that the court is finally showing us their value and putting it in writing. A lot of us work very diligently, and it's nice to see that the court is finally recognizing it in a way that's, commensurate to how we're performing.
Yep, absolutely. And in future years, this is a benefit that, like anything, once you get something established, then you look towards it in future years as a way to increase. Certainly not where we'd put a lot of energy, but something that is relatively affordable for the court to do. Okay, for the reimbursement of professional memberships, I think Lawrence, you, Joanne, and Laura had some comments.
Sure. Yeah, just to present the language itself very quickly, you will note that the funds have remained the same. However, the reimbursement for professional memberships, currently it has been 50% reimbursement for one professional membership. We actually know a lot of members take advantage of that quite a bit, especially folks who like to be part of a bar association or any type of association within their field. The court has now agreed to give full reimbursement for up to 2 professional memberships. And that's something that truly is a benefit for a lot of members who want to continue to be a member in some of these associations, which oftentimes are kind of expensive. And so be able to get a full reimbursement is certainly something that no longer is a barrier for some of our members who want to stay active in these other organizations or associations.
I don't really have any, because Lawrence said it in a nutshell. In the previous contract, if you guys belong to any professional agency, such as a bar association or AFCC for mediators, we were reimbursed for only half of that, and there's only one association. So now we're saying, well, that's going to be fully reimbursable, so 100%. And if they'll reimburse up to actually 2 organizations. So I know there's a lot of them that had different membership in the different bars association, and in the mediators, I know there's different ones too. So that I thought was great, because it does literally minimum $100, if not more.
And I honestly, just to put as an aside, I think that a benefit was long overdue. I know for court investigators, there's a professional association, and as a member, you get a discounted rate for the yearly conference. So a lot of investigators weren't incentivized to join the organization because they thought, why would I give the court that benefit of a lower rate when I'm only being reimbursed X amount? So I think all the way around, this is a good payout for both sides.
All right. Thank you, Joanne and Vanessa. I want to offer a correction. When I was talking about item 5 for scheduled time off cash out increase, just to note, you currently can cash up to 40 with an additional 40, so a total of 80. Now that additional has been increased from 40 to 60, so you can now cash up to a total of 100, 40 plus 60, 100. So I just want to give that clarity over there. Our next item for the site letter agreement.
There's a question.
Oh,
Sorry, I didn't see it on the list. there a typo in section 2, the full contract 2.2A, basic base plan? The variance from step 1 is eliminated for the numerical 1 to 5 is eliminated for 6.
Ah.
Or some employees?
So actually I can answer that. So previously in the oat contract, the current system actually has 6 steps, but the old contract still had the vestigial language of steps 1 to 5. So what we actually made that change there is to update the language. It's not actually we're adding a new step, but it's to make sure that although we understand, I don't think the court would take back step 6 overnight. We do want to make sure our most recent MOA, we're going through a fine-tooth comb to actually make that correction. So yes, it was a typo previously. We're now correcting it in this recent cycle.
But that's a good catch. I wish we had another step to offer you, but yeah.
Well, I just wanted to make sure we weren't doing it. That's a big extra step.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't apply to anybody who I recruit. Well, I don't represent who I supervise and.
Okay, yeah.
Okay.
So back to the side letter of agreements, we have 2 primary ones that the membership have, most of the membership has access to. And you'll see that in the tentative agreement under the appendices for those who are online, you're just gonna have to scroll down all the way down to page 40, 31, I believe, 31, 32, where that begins. But for folks who are in person, you'll see there's 2 separate attachments. One is the telework program and one is the primarily remote assignment. And so essentially 2 parts that have happened here is that for the telework program side of the agreement, we have made it to where it's remaining in effect for the term of this contract. Every single time that this side letter of agreement comes to expiration, we have to reopen it, either make some language changes or to renew it through a term extension. In this case, we have done that to make it run concurrently with the MOA. This saves a lot of time as well without having to meet with it separately, but also make sure that we tackle all the big issues for this unit whenever negotiations come about. Something that's substantial is that we have made the addition of the following classifications to the telework program side letter of agreement. Following classifications being senior accountant, the mediator, the senior mediator, and supervising probate investigator. As far as the primarily remote assignments, you'll see there's a lot of redlining in the language itself. There aren't actually really much substantial changes other than cleanup language, removing the vestigial language. But I think something else in terms of terminology, this used to be considered a pilot project. And a pilot project inherently is temporary in nature. What we're stating, and perhaps this is substantial, we're telling to the court that there's a vested interest, and there was a mutual interest at the end of the day to make sure that this was no longer a pilot project, but rather a continued practice of the court. And so now that we have this particular agreement to run concurrently with the contract and to be extended, you will continue to see the existence of the primarily remote assignment program, as well as the telework program as the side letter agreements that have been, well, hopefully ratified with the rest of the contract. Okay, turn it over to you, Zeb.
Great. So item 10 on page 4 here is the internal notice of recruitments. So there was some interest that is hard to memorialize in a contract where SEMA members were saying, hey, look, we'd like to get first bite at promotions and opportunities within the. So we toyed around with some different offerings of, hey, maybe SEMA members are advantaged in some way. If things are tied, then it goes to an existing member. That's already in the contract. So what we settled on was 3-day advance notice. So what you can anticipate is a unit-wide email that at least lets you all know ahead of time when there's going to be a SEMA vacancy posted, so that you can polish up your resume, get ready, whatever it might be. And then it's just one more notification so people can really anticipate and get ready for those vacancies that are being filled. Okay. And Lawrence, I think you wanted to talk about the VRWH.
Yes, indeed. VRWH stands for Volunteer Reduced Work Hours. Our current contract language states that it is of the CEO's decision on determining whether or not VRWH will be offered depending on staff resources. There is a new language now here to say that for the term of this agreement, VRWH will be made available. And so for folks who have an interest without needing to ask Rebecca directly, if whether or not VRWX will be offered, it will be offered for the term of this agreement for those who are interested in. Okay, I'll give it to you, pal.
Sure. So paid admin leave, this is something that has only come up about four times in the last 5 years of this contracts administration. What paid admin leave is hopefully none of you have to go through it. A couple of you have, because as I mentioned, it's come up 4 times. What it is that while discipline is pending or while you are pending a fitness for duty examination, the court may place you out on paid administrative leave. So what that means is you get your full paycheck, you continue to accrue benefit. That's part of what we needed to do here, is that you continue to accrue benefits as though you were working. And the court makes its determination. Normally, the reason this is done is because there's some kind of a risk of you continuing to be at work, right? Pretend someone made an allegation against me that Zeb's embezzling money, right? Well, you don't want me to keep coming to work and be in a position to embezzle money while you figure out if I'm embezzling money or not, right? Because then I can transfer more to Zurich or whatever it is that I do, right? So there's a good reason to put people out on paid admin leave. This does a couple of things. It restricts, or rather it means that they have to notify us when someone is out on paid admin leave. And we really wanted to highlight for the court that they really have to fish or cut bait. The language is not as strong as I would have liked because of where we ended up, but it means that the union gets immediate notification if any of you are placed out on admin leave, and they give us a reason for why the individual is out. It also means that it gives us a chance to advocate, and perhaps most importantly, it sets up that you continue to accrue all your benefits as though you were working. So while it's very clear in labor law that you have to be paid, things like eligibility for FMLA, how you accrue seniority, how you accrue your pension becomes more of an argument or discussion point. And this states, no, you just accrue it as though you. So gives you a little bit of an example of that. I know lots of you probably haven't heard of fitness for duty or what. Has anyone here heard of fitness for duty? Put your hand up if you have. Nobody? Okay, long story short, fitness for duty. Hopefully nobody here ever has to go through it. It's only happened once in my tenure in the court, which has been a while now, I think 13, 14 years, is where you think someone is compromised, either because they're addicted to a substance or because they've had some sort of psychological incident. And so if that report happens, then you have to wait until what's called a QME, third-party qualified medical examiner, looks at you and says, you know what? Yes, Zeb yelled on Friday, but he didn't have a psychotic break. He just yelled at somebody, right? Or, yeah, he smelled like schnapps, but he wasn't drunk, or whatever it might be. So that's where a third-party medical examiner comes in. Until the court can wait for that, you're also put out a paid admin. So just so you know, and it is an option. Behaving erratically, that is an option that you have, and you'd have to consult with HR in order to do that. But it's something that you do have at your